The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. This tale was found among the papers of the late Diedrich Knickerbocker. A pleasing land of drowsy heads it was, of dreams that wave before the half-shut eye, and of gay castles in the clouds that pass, forever flushing round a summer sky, castle of indolence. In the bosom of one of those spacious coves indenting the eastern shore of the Hudson, at that broad expansion of the river called by ancient Dutch navigators the Tappan Zee, where they prudently shortened sail and implored the protection of St. Nicholas when crossing, there lies a small market town or rural port. Some call it Greensburg, but more generally and properly it is known as Tarrytown. This name, we are told, was given long ago by the good housewives of the neighboring country, from their husbands' inveterate habit of lingering about the village tavern on market days. Be that as it may, I do not vouch for the fact. I mention it merely to be precise and authentic. Not far from this village, about 2 miles perhaps, there lies a little valley, or rather a lap of land among high hills. It is one of the quietest places in the whole world. A small brook glides through it, murmuring just softly enough to lull one to repose, and the occasional whistle of a quail, or the tapping of a woodpecker, is almost the only sound that breaks the uniform tranquility. I recollect, when a stripling, my first exploit in squirrel shooting, in a grove of tall walnut trees shading one side of the valley. I wandered in at noontime, when all nature is peculiarly quiet, and was startled by the roar of my own gun. It broke the Sabbath stillness, and was prolonged, reverberated by angry echoes. If ever I should wish for a retreat, where I might steal from the world and its distractions, and dream quietly away the remnant of a troubled life, I know of none more promising than this little valley. From the listless repose of the place, and the peculiar character of its inhabitants, descendants of the original Dutch settlers, this sequestered glen has long been known as Sleepy Hollow. Its rustic lads are called the Sleepy Hollow Boys throughout the neighboring country. A drowsy, dreamy influence seems to hang over the land and pervade the very atmosphere. Some say the place was bewitched by a high German doctor in the early days of the settlement. Others, that an old Indian chief, the prophet or wizard of his tribe, held his powwows there before the country was discovered by Master Hendrik Hudson. Certain it is, the place still remains under the sway of some witching power, a spell that holds the minds of the good people, causing them to walk in continual reverie. They are given to marvelous beliefs, subject to trances and visions, and frequently see strange sights and hear music and voices in the air. The whole neighborhood abounds with local tales, haunted spots, and twilight superstitions. Stars shoot and meteors glare, more often across the valley than in any other part of the country. The nightmare, with her whole ninefold, seems to make this her favorite scene for gambols. The dominant spirit, however, haunting this enchanted region, and seeming commander-in-chief of all powers of the air, is the apparition of a figure on horseback, without a head. Some say it is the ghost of a Hessian trooper, whose head was carried away by a cannonball in some nameless battle during the Revolutionary War, who is ever and anon seen by the country folk, hurrying along in the gloom of night, as if on the wings of the wind. His haunts are not confined to the valley, but sometimes extend to the adjacent roads, and especially near a church not far off. Indeed, certain authentic historians of those parts, careful in collecting and collating facts about this specter, allege that since the trooper's body was buried in the churchyard, the ghost rides forth nightly to the battle scene in search of his head. The rushing speed with which he sometimes passes along the hollow, like a midnight blast, is because he is belated and hurries back to the churchyard before daybreak. Such is the general purport of this superstition, which has furnished many wild stories in this shadowy region. The specter is known at every country fireside by the name the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. Remarkably, the visionary tendency I have mentioned is not confined to native inhabitants, but unconsciously imbibed by everyone who stays here for a time. However wide awake they were before entering that sleepy region, they are sure in a little time to inhale the witching air and begin to grow imaginative, dream dreams, and see apparitions. I mention this peaceful spot with all praise, for it is in such little retired Dutch valleys, found here and there in the great state of New York, that population, manners, and customs remain fixed, while the great torrent of migration and improvement, incessantly changing other parts of this restless country, sweeps by them unnoticed. They are like little nooks of still water, bordering a rapid stream, where straw and bubbles ride quietly at anchor, or slowly revolve in their mimic harbor, undisturbed by the rush of the passing current. Though many years have passed since I trod the drowsy shades of Sleepy Hollow, I question whether I would not still find the same trees and the same families growing in its sheltered bosom. In this byplace of nature, there lived in a remote period of American history, that is to say, some 30 years ago, a worthy wight named Ichabod Crane. He sojourned, or as he expressed it, tarried, in Sleepy Hollow to instruct the children of the vicinity. He was a native of Connecticut, a state supplying the Union with pioneers of the mind as well as the forest, and sending forth yearly its legions of frontier woodmen and country schoolmasters. The name Crane was apt for his person. He was tall, exceedingly lank, narrow shoulders, long arms and legs, hands dangling a mile out of his sleeves, feet that might have served as shovels, and his whole frame hung together most loosely. To see him striding along a hill's profile on a windy day, with clothes bagging and fluttering, one might mistake him for the genius of famine descending upon the earth, or some scarecrow eloped from a cornfield. His schoolhouse was a low, one-room building, rudely built of logs, windows partly glazed, partly patched with leaves of old copybooks. It was ingeniously secured at vacant hours, a withe twisted in the door handle, stakes against the window shutters, so that, although a thief might get in with ease, he would find difficulty getting out. An idea likely borrowed by the architect, Joost van Houten, from the mystery of an eel pot. The schoolhouse stood in a lonely but pleasant spot, just at the foot of a wooded hill, with a brook close by and a formidable birch tree growing at one end. From there, the low murmur of pupils' voices, conning their lessons, could be heard on a drowsy summer day, like the hum of a beehive, interrupted now and then by the master's authoritative voice in tones of menace or command, or, perchance, by the appalling sound of the birch as he urged a tardy loiterer along the flowery path of knowledge. Truth be told, he was a conscientious man, ever bearing in mind the golden maxim, spare the rod and spoil the child. Ichabod Crane's scholars were certainly not spoiled. I would not have you imagine he was one of those cruel school potentates who revel in their pupils' smart. On the contrary, he administered justice with discrimination rather than severity, taking the burden off the weak and laying it on the strong. The mere puny stripling, who winced at the least flourish of the rod, was passed by with indulgence. But justice's claims were satisfied by inflicting a double portion on some tough, wrong-headed, broad-skirted Dutch urchin, who sulked, swelled, and grew dogged and sullen beneath the birch. All this he called doing his duty by their parents. He never inflicted chastisement without assuring the smarting urchin that he would remember it and thank him for it the longest day he had to live. When school hours ended, he was companion and playmate to the larger boys, and on holiday afternoons he escorted some of the smaller ones home, especially those with pretty sisters or good housewives for mothers, noted for the comforts of the cupboard. Indeed, it behooved him to stay on good terms with his pupils. The school's revenue was small, scarcely enough for his daily bread, for he was a huge feeder, and though lank, had the dilating powers of an anaconda. To help with his upkeep, he was, according to country custom, boarded and lodged at the houses of the farmers whose children he taught. He was their model, leading the way as he scoured the countryside, attending every scene of feud or merriment for miles around. In cold weather, he stood out, wearing a fur cap topped with a flaunting fox's tail. When folks at a country gathering spotted this familiar crest from afar, whipping about among a squad of hard riders, they always braced themselves for a squall. Sometimes, at midnight, his crew could be heard dashing past farmhouses, whooping and hallooing like a troop of Don Cossacks. The old dames, startled awake, would listen until the clatter faded, then exclaim, there goes Brom Bones and his gang." Neighbors regarded him with a mix of awe, admiration, and goodwill. Whenever a madcap prank or rustic brawl broke out nearby, they'd shake their heads, certain Brom Bones was behind it all. It was clear his advances signaled rival suitors to back down. None dared challenge this lion and his courtship. So when his horse was spotted tied to Van Tassel's paling on a Sunday night, a sure sign his master was sparking within, all other suitors passed by in despair, turning the battle to other fields. Ichabod Crane courting Katrina Van Tassel beneath the great elm tree, by the spring, at twilight. Ichabod Crane, tall, lanky, narrow-shouldered, dressed simply in colonial style, with green, glassy eyes. Katrina Van Tassel, rosy-cheeked, plump, adorned with golden ornaments and period dress. Inside the Van Tassel farmhouse porch, Balt Van Tassel smoking his pipe at one end, his wife at the spinning wheel on the other. Through the window, a wooden warrior toy perches on the barn pinnacle. Baltus Van Tassel, a content, well-fed farmer dressed in traditional attire, his Dutch wife, an elderly woman, diligently busy at the spinning wheel. Brom Bones playing a rustic, practical joke on Ichabod, introducing a scoundrel dog trained to whine, ludicrously, right in a singing school. Ichabod, surprised and dismayed, stands inside or near the schoolhouse as the dog whines loudly in the foreground, its expression utterly ridiculous. Brom Bones, mischievous smile curling, lurking in the shadow near the edge of the schoolhouse,